Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode, so I have three questions I want to dive into. But first, before I do that, if you are interested in learning more about a body recomp, what it is, how to do it, the different types of body recomp, and then 10 things that you need to have body recomp, then my free body recomp checklist is for you. The link to that is in the show notes. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's question. So my first question is, should you only fat loss for like aesthetic purposes? So the person that asked this was basically asking, if I want a fat loss diet, should my only goal be like, is improving aesthetics going to be like the only thing that we would ever base that off of? And while I do think that is going to be a big thing, you don't also necessarily have to do fat loss for aesthetic purposes. So like the thing that I would say here would be like, if you've been fat or you've been out of a fat loss diet for a while, say 2+ years, something like that, you've been adding muscle, still focused on your inputs in terms of still practicing good habits, things like that, but you don't necessarily have a ton of body fat. And would you not have somebody do a fat loss diet there? Now, in some cases, yes, depending on where the person's at, what their blood work is like, how they're feeling overall. Maybe we can like, what have their results been in terms of, is their body comp like still getting better, training performance, all these things, right? And so in that scenario, if it's been a couple of years since you fat loss diet, to me, there's a health benefit of getting into a deficit for at least a short period of time, even if you don't necessarily need to drastically improve your physique, right? I just think being in that state of energy balance is going to do wonders for, again, just metabolic health overall. I think from like a blood sugar standpoint, insulin standpoint, like to me, getting into a deficit every once in a while is going to be great there. Plus, it's a great thing to just practice like having some hunger, managing that. To me, that's a good stressor on the body that if you haven't done that for a while, there's going to be some benefit to applying that stressor under the right circumstances. You don't just want to do it just because. I do think there is a benefit to it from that standpoint. And again, we look at overall health, like from a longevity standpoint. To me, having a period of time where you do restrict calories for a short, again, it doesn't have to necessarily be long, but it's like, hey, I'm going to put my body in this state where it's breaking things down versus always just building up or even again, being your maintenance. I just think that there is going to be a benefit to fat loss dieting for that purpose. So for me, this fat loss phase that I'm currently doing, I haven't been in a deficit in over 18 months, pretty long time, but not necessarily like the shortest time either. And so for me, it's, hey, I just was getting to the point to where I just felt like I needed to do a deficit. Yes, obviously the benefit's going to be an improved physique, but I wasn't necessarily had a ton of body fat to where it's like, hey, I need a fat loss diet. It was just one of those things where I mentally feel better when I get into a deficit every once in a while. My habits improve. Plus, practicing like being hungry and feeling a little hungry to me is a good skill that I need to have and be able to do. It's like a kind of stress resilient thing where it's like when people start eating at normal amounts for extended periods of time, like you get to the point where any amount of hunger is like this big stressor on the body. And it really shouldn't be. Like you should be able to go a decent amount of time with less food and just be in that state of your body breaking down and having a little bit of hunger. So to me, yes, the big benefit of fat loss is going to be like an aesthetic thing, but I do think there's some things under the hood that are going to be beneficial from a fat loss phase perspective if you haven't done it for a while. Now, if you're someone hasn't quote unquote pushed a fat loss diet, but then half the time you're eating low calorie, skipping meals, like you're just that kind of chronic under eater, then for you, I don't think you're going to get as much benefit out of that. This is going to be more so someone who's eaten enough for the last year and a half, 2 years, whatever it may be. So I like this question because again, you don't always have to be aesthetic driven, but as I said, anytime we lose body fat, you're likely going to see an improvement in your, from an aesthetic standpoint. So that's a nice bonus there. So hopefully that helps you rethink what's going to be the reason to get into a deficit. And again, sometimes it goes past just from an aesthetic purpose there. All right. So next question is around DEXA scans. So my DEXA in October 2024 had me at 31% body fat. I did a slowish cut until I hit around 168 in the middle of May and came back at 21.4%. According to it, I lost 5 pounds of muscle. I understand some of that could be how many carbs I had in my system at one time or the other. I'm normalizing calories now. How long can I expect for it to take to gain that tissue back? I'll go over that last part of the question, but I really wanted to hit on DEXAs in general. I think I've briefly hit on them. I'm actually having somebody on the podcast next week who does some research around this. He's in a lab that really focuses on body composition. I'll likely get some more kind of insight on this here. But so for starters, well, DEXA scans already have a built-in error rate. I don't know the exact number and I don't want to say because I would just be making that up. But from my understanding, DEXAs are going to already have an error rate of measuring body fat percentage and then muscle. The gold standard for measuring muscle mass is going to be like MRI, which we don't have. We're not going to do it for that purpose. It's going to be like super expensive. And so people aren't going to do it for that purpose, right? So that's going to be the gold standard from measuring muscle mass. Before we dive any further into this, just understand that you're already going to have that error rate when it comes to muscle mass in a DEXA, especially when we're talking about individual level, like the individual. When we're talking population level, like when they use these in studies, they can be a little bit better and a little bit more accurate, again, from my understanding. Also, we want to ask, was it looking at lean mass? Because if it was looking at lean mass, that's going to take into account skeletal muscle, it's going to take into account organs, it's going to take into account connective tissue, and it's going to take into account body water. So with that being said, let's take this specific example. You're going from 31 to 21%. You're obviously in a deficit, right, to drop body fat. That's going to come with lower caloric intake. Your body's going to be in that breaking down mode that I'm talking about. And so you're going to lose water weight from that, and glycogen is going to decrease, right? So if we look at it from the lean mass standpoint, you're going to drop lean mass, glycogen being the storage form of carbohydrates. And again, that's going to be depleted when you're in a deficit, and or like you have high like training load as well too, and you're not replenishing that, which again, because we're in a deficit, we're not replenishing that. But again, you may lose some water weight as you're dieting down. So again, hydration is going to be key, right? Believe this or not, but organs may shrink slightly, and that's going to show up as lean mass loss. Okay. So based on what you did leading up to the days prior, up to and the days prior. So again, like we're talking months on end and the days leading up to it prior, can have a significant impact on the lean mass that shows up on the DEXA scan. So what you do leading up to it's super important. We already know there's a built-in error rate. And it's not just measuring muscle, it's measuring lean mass. Okay. And so we have to really standardize how we do this. And when I say standardize, not, yeah, I did everything the same. I did it at the same time. No, that's not enough. Like you need to have the same amount of food beforehand. You need to make sure that it's the same time of day. Like you need to be under the same hydration conditions as well too, even because a small amount of hydration is going to impact your water, which is going to impact the lean mass, right? And if you did it before you trained, after trained, or around training, or even what the training you've done leading up to it, if you have had more depleting workouts the days leading up to it, that's going to impact it. If sleep is off, that's going to impact it, right? All these things are going to impact this number here. So when I say standardize, I mean standardize. So there's that, right? And again, with all this being said, remember, it already has a built-in error rate, even if you do everything perfect. She did bring this up in the question, like the technician is going to be important too. And it was a different technician. So that again is also going to change things up a bit here too. So my answer to this would be maybe you lost some muscle, but maybe you didn't. How do you look in the mirror? To me, that's the most important thing. If you look better and you feel better and all these things, to me, that's more important than what a DEXA scan tells us, because to me, it's just noise. It's just noise. We need to look at that. You need to see how you exactly look and how you feel. That's going to be the most important there, because at the end of the day, like no one's going to be like, oh yeah, I can definitely, let me see what your DEXA says, right? People are just going to look at you and that. And also understand that when you fat loss diet and you are just basing this off of where you're at the end of the fat loss phase, understand you're probably going to be a bit depleted as well too. So from here, what can you do? Okay, if this is the case, say worst case scenario, you did actually lose muscle. It's just, okay, where can you improve your fat loss methods next time? One thing, I don't know if this person mentioned this, but if you went from 31% to 21% from October to May, maybe you needed a diet break in there where you had some time to take a little bit of time off. So instead of just going straight through, maybe you stopped at 23, 24%, and then you went down to 21%. And again, somebody will ask, how long does that break need to be? It just depends. There's no good time. There's no perfect time on there. But again, maybe that's something you needed to do, was take a break. We have that. So we want to make sure that we're adding that in. And at the end of the day, this is exactly why I don't recommend clients take DEXA scans or body fat percentage measurements anyways. Because again, best case, it gets you within a range where you are at, but worst case, it messes with your head mentally. And now this leads to overcorrecting, anxiety, and stress around what you're doing. So I just don't have clients do it. I want to know how you're feeling. I want to know how your clothes are fitting. I want to know how you're actually looking. That's more important to me anyways. And again, if we find that, let's say we do this and you're not overly thrilled with your physique at the end of the fat loss phase, then it's like, hey, could we have done anything different? And this is where we're going to be troubleshooting. And obviously we would be troubleshooting throughout. And then it's okay, maybe we need to throw in some new strategies next time around. Or maybe it's just like, hey, you don't have as much muscle as you thought, and you need to spend some time focused on that. These are all things that can potentially happen with that. Now, let's say again, this person did actually lose 5 pounds of muscle. How quickly would you gain that back? It's hard to say how quickly, but if you just get back to eating enough, weight training properly, right? Sending the right signal, getting everything else dialed in, eating enough food, not eating too much, I think you could gain it back fairly quickly there. But again, 5 pounds of muscle, like that would be very noticeable. So you would know if you lost 5 pounds of muscle in that process there. So hopefully that's helpful. And it gives you guys some ideas about like why you probably shouldn't take DEXA. And if you do, you need to really take it with a grain of salt on there. All right. So one client brought up tracking their blood sugar, and I think this can be super helpful. And they were just talking about some things. And so I just want to go over, if you do track your blood sugar or are interested in that, I just want to go over some things because I feel like there's a lot of myths around this, especially around blood sugar spikes more than anything, because most people are going to see blood sugar spikes and they think that that's this like terrible thing. And I think it's very context dependent. So first we want to look at individual response. Okay. So if you do track your blood sugar and you get it spiked, and like you'll see people on the internet be like, don't eat this because it's going to spike your blood sugar. And this gets this kind of fear-based mongering around certain foods, especially carbohydrates, because carbohydrates are going to be the one that will likely spike it up the most there. And as I'll talk about, there's some specific things that we need to focus on. So again, there's some important context here with this. So one, individual response matters. Some people will respond differently to the same foods just based on the food, how their body just utilizes that food. But there's also like current health status. These are all going to be things that are super important, right? So one person to the next is going to just have a different response to different foods. Now, if you do get a high blood sugar response to certain foods, that may be something that you want to potentially look at minimizing. But the issue with that is, and I'm going to dive into all this here in a minute, but one issue being the current state that your body's in is going to have a huge impact on this. So I want to come back to this, but just understand, generally speaking, some people are going to have higher responses to certain foods. And again, there's going to be some foods that will likely spike it up no matter what, right? Like higher GI type foods are going to be foods that likely will spike it up higher compared to just protein. Okay. Spikes aren't inherently bad. What matters more is how long it takes your blood sugar to come back down. So a delayed response can be a sign of impaired blood sugar regulation. So what we want to be careful with is that area under the curve. So if it spikes up, again, if it comes up super high, again, just in general, the higher and higher it comes up, that we want to look into that a bit more, or we want to be somewhat skeptical of that and see what's going on there. But the issue being, if it stays elevated and it slowly declines over time, that's the bigger issue at play. But if it comes down fairly quickly after, that's a good sign there with that. Now, this could be something where, to me, the more often you do that, the more often you have, that would be something you would want to look into. But in saying that, this is where we need to come back to some of these other things that I'm going to talk about. Timing matters. So eating carbs around a workout or earlier in the day can lead to a smaller, quicker spike in return to baseline. And so again, your response may be better earlier in the day. Whereas if you have something that spikes it really high at night, you may find that it's slower to go down because again, our blood sugar regulation is much better earlier in the day. And then the issue with that is now that can impact sleep, right? So again, timing of when you do this is super important. Your meal composition is going to play a huge role. A carb-only meal is going to spike blood sugar way higher than a balanced meal with protein, fiber, and fat is going to as well too. These are things that people often overlook, right? When they're just like, oh, this banana, yeah, the banana by itself is going to freaking spike it. It's just carbs. So like the meal composition. And again, in saying that, if you find that when your blood sugar spikes super high and then you do have these issues of now you're like super hungry right after, or like you get tired and like lethargic after, that's a sign that you need to look into things. So I do think that, so again, if we come back, spikes aren't inherently bad unless there are signs that it is bad, but we can lower that spike by doing some of these things I talked about. But again, your body's current state is also a big factor. So being under more stress, like getting poor sleep, being in like a deficit or surplus, these can all lead to exaggerated blood sugar responses. So that's the other thing that people miss is they blame it on one like food or thing, but they're not looking at the big picture of the current state their body is in. If you're under high stress load, like you're going to probably have a higher and slower blood sugar regulation response. Poor sleep. So what I do like about this is it can teach you like how those things are going to impact, how they're going to impact how your body utilizes the food you give it. So that's where I think it can be super helpful, right? Where it's, hey, if you see it super high, like I think the take home with this is I'm not saying high spikes are good or bad. It's just we have to look into it a bit more and we have to look into all these things. So tracking your blood sugar can definitely be helpful, but context is everything, right? To me, I would be more concerned about how quickly levels come back down than how high they spike. But again, high spikes are a sign that we need to potentially look into it, but we have to look into things elsewhere, right? Because like I said, the big issue being people see those high spikes and then they're like, oh crap, this is bad. This food's bad. I got to stay away from that food. And then it's okay. But we're missing the big picture here with it. So as I said, I think it shows you how your inputs, stress, sleep, meal quality can all impact how your body utilizes the food you give it. So I think it can be a good learning tool, but we have to understand the context there. If you really want to see like where your blood sugar's at, and if it's in a good spot, like you'd want to look at like fasting insulin, A1C. We could look at your glucose as well too, but that's obviously what you're going to be getting here through this. We maybe want to look at some of those other markers as well too with that. So if you're finding that you're doing this and you're getting constant high spikes, then that's a sign maybe you should get your blood work done, and then also look at some of these things that I talked about here with that. So hopefully that was helpful. And again, just I thought this was good to bring up because I feel like there's people out there that will say that it's all automatically bad, or I also see people that do this and then they get caught up in some of the minutia data with that. Again, we're looking at trends, right? So hopefully that was helpful. If you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, that will help more people find it. I'm going to have my free body recomp checklist. A link to that is in the show notes. And then lastly, if you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_. That's where I'm most active. And you can find me. You can reach out with any questions or something you don't agree with. You can always reach out there and we can chat. So that's it for this episode. I'll chat with you guys next time.